Welcome to PoliticallyX. That feeling when you are standing at the gas station and the nozzle is in your car and you are just watching those digital numbers spinning higher and higher, faster and
Oh,
faster?
yeah. It is a physically painful thing to watch.
Right. You are basically watching your grocery budget and, I don't know, your weekend plans just evaporate right in front of your eyes. And man, if you were driving a diesel right now.
Oh, do not even get me started on diesel. That is a whole different level of pain for your wallet.
Exactly. But here's the craziest part about what is happening right now. The raw ingredient used to make that gas you are pumping, it is actually getting cheaper.
Which, I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to most people, right?
And at all.
Mhm.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into this massive disconnect between the barrel and the pump. We are unpacking the political and economic tensions of this gas price surge and the ongoing Iran war.
And we're really going to look at why the numbers on your corner gas station sign are just, completely defying gravity.
Yeah, and we have some really fresh data to help us do that. We are pulling from recent CBS News reporting, which was updated May 6th, 2026, and the data is current to literally today, May 9th.
Which is crucial because this situation is moving fast.
Very fast. And just a quick note for you listening before we jump in, we are going to be touching on some pretty politically sensitive ripple effects here.
Right, because you cannot really separate gas prices from politics.
You really cannot. But
Yeah.
our mission today for this deep dive is just to impartially report the facts from our sources. We're not taking any political sides here. We just want to help you understand the mechanics at play.
Exactly. We were just looking at the machinery underneath it all. And the mechanics driving this are fascinating because they completely shatter our common sense understanding of supply and demand.
Yeah, because you assume that if the core ingredient gets cheaper, the final product should get cheaper too.
Right. But the journey from, say, a subterranean oil field in the Middle East to the fuel injector in your engine is, well, it is incredibly fragile.
Super fragile.
We are basically witnessing a masterclass in how a geopolitical choke point instantly ripples into a localized economic crisis.
Okay, let's lay out the ground truth first, just to validate what every single driver is feeling today. Looking at the latest AAA data from today, May 9th, the national average for regular gas is sitting at $4.53 a gallon.
Wow.
Yeah. And diesel is punishingly high at $5.65. To put that regular gas price in perspective, we are paying $1.38 more per gallon than we were exactly 1 year ago.
And the timeline of that surge is really the most alarming variable here because gas prices usually creep up gradually.
Right, a few cents here and there.
Exactly. But we are looking at a 52% jump. That is an extra $1.56 per gallon tacked on just since the Iran war started in late February.
Just since February, that is wild.
It is. The price shock has been compressed into a window of barely over 2 months, and it is dragging us dangerously close to the all-time highest national average of $5.02 that we saw back in June 2022.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's unpack this central mystery, because this is where the math feels totally broken to me. Fuel costs are climbing relentlessly. Yet, the international benchmark for crude oil, Brent Crude, actually dropped recently.
Yes, it did.
It fell 6.4% down to $102.83 a barrel. And our domestic benchmark, the U.S. West Texas Intermediate, fell 6% down to $96.11.
Right. So you see those numbers drop and you think, hey, relief is coming.
Exactly. It's like hearing the price of flour just went on sale, but then you walk into the bakery and they're suddenly charging you double for a loaf of bread. Why is that happening?
So we have to separate the financial market from the physical spot market. That 6% drop in the crude markets, it wasn't driven by actual oil barrels sloshing into storage tanks.
Okay.
It was driven entirely by a fragile emotion, which is hope.
Hope? Just hope.
Literally hope.
Uh-huh.
The crude market saw renewed hopes for a U.S. and Iran agreement. You have to remember, financial markets trade on futures contracts.
Right.
The traders sitting in Chicago or New York, they are placing bets on what the supply will look like next week, next month, or next year.
Okay, I see.
So the moment there was even a whisper of a diplomatic breakthrough, the algorithms and the traders priced in this rosy scenario where oil eventually flows freely again. And so the price of the paper contract dropped.
Okay, so going back to my bakery analogy, it is like a weather forecast predicting a massive rainstorm next month.
Yeah.
Umbrella manufacturers might start dropping their wholesale prices today because they're expecting a massive surplus of materials down the line.
That is a great way to look at it.
But if you are standing outside in a downpour right now, the vendor on the street corner is still going to charge you double for an umbrella. The crude market is the distant forecast, but the gas pump is the current downpour.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanism. Hope and diplomatic rumors, they do not fill gas tanks. The wholesale buyers who supply your local corner station, they are dealing with physical realities.
Yeah, they need actual liquid gas.
Exactly. They have underground tanks that need to be filled today so you can drive to work tomorrow. They are looking at the tangible supply chain disruptions and the sheer scarcity of physical liquid available on the open market, and they are pricing that immediate panic into what you pay at the pump.
Which brings us to the actual geographic bottleneck causing this panic. We keep hearing the phrase supply chain disruptions, which sounds, I don't know, so abstract.
It does sound abstract, but it's very physical.
Right. It is happening in one very specific strait of water, the Strait of Hormuz. And the sheer vulnerability here is just hard to wrap your head around.
It really is.
Our sources note that 20% of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas has to float through this one narrow geographical artery. And right now, it basically remains largely closed to ship traffic due to the conflict.
It is arguably the most critical geopolitical choke point on the entire planet. It is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean.
Wow, only one.
It's just one. When the Strait of Hormuz constricts, the global economy immediately gasps for air. There is no alternative maritime detour. You cannot just reroute those supertankers around a different continent like you can with the Suez Canal.
Right.
If the strait is blocked, the oil just stays in the Gulf.
But wait, hold on. I am looking at these situation reports, and they clearly state that some shipping traffic is still moving.
Sure.
There are ships successfully navigating the strait, and diplomats are actively at the table negotiating. So if there is actual oil moving, even if it is reduced, and peace talks are happening, isn't this spike just a massive overreaction?
It might feel that way.
I mean, it feels like the oil companies are just using the headline of a war to justify panic pricing and pad their margins.
What's fascinating here is we have to look at the difference between a trickle of ships and a steady, predictable flow. Dave Sacra, the chief U.S. market strategist at Morningstar, provides a really sobering analysis on this exact point.
Okay, what does he say?
He highlights the element of time. We are now well over 2 months into this conflict without any long-term resolution in sight. The global energy market calculates risk based on sustained volume.
So a few ships sneaking through under naval escort, that doesn't really move the needle.
Not even close. Sacra points out that, effectively, for the broad global market, the strait behaves as if it is completely closed.
Wow.
Yeah, a few successful tanker runs, they do not offset a sudden 20% deficit in the global energy supply. Think of it like a major highway.
Okay.
If 4 out of 5 lanes are blocked by a massive accident, the fact that a few cars are squeezing onto the shoulder, that doesn't mean the highway is open.
No, you are still stuck in traffic for hours.
Exactly. The traffic jam still stretches for miles. The physical reality of that missing volume is the premium you are paying for at the pump.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting because crude oil is only one piece of the puzzle. Most people, myself included, honestly, assume a gallon of gas is just a gallon of crude oil that has been slightly filtered and pumped into their car.
Right, that is a super common misconception.
But if we break down the underlying mechanics of that $4.53 per gallon, the U.S. Energy Information Administration data reveals a completely different picture. Crude oil only accounts for 51% of the cost of a gallon of gas, just barely half.
And that remaining 49% is where the real vulnerability in our domestic infrastructure lies.
Yeah, according to the EIA, that remaining cost is split into 3 buckets. 18% goes to taxes, 11% goes to distribution and marketing, and a massive 20% goes strictly to refining.
And that 20% refining chunk, that is the hidden catalyst in this Iran war scenario.
How so?
Well, refining isn't just a simple filtration system. It is a massive, highly volatile industrial process known as cracking. You are taking thick, unrefined crude and putting it through complex thermodynamic systems.
Okay.
You have to break down the molecular bonds to create the highly specific combustible chemical mixture that a car engine requires.
Right. And the reporting highlights that Middle East refineries have sustained actual physical damage during the course of this conflict, which means even if the oil makes it out of the ground, the factories that make it usable are offline.
Exactly. You cannot just patch a pipe and turn a damaged refinery back on. Rebuilding these facilities requires massive engineering efforts, highly specialized parts, and, importantly, a stable environment.
Which you do not have in a war zone.
Right. None of those things exist in an active conflict zone. So even if the geopolitical tensions cooled tomorrow and crude oil flowed freely through the Strait of Hormuz, the global refining capacity has been fundamentally kneecapped.
So the bottleneck just shifts from the water to the processing plants.
Precisely.
That explains why the pain at the pump isn't distributed equally, even within our own borders here in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely.
Patrick DeHaan, who is a petroleum expert at GasBuddy, he pointed out in the CBS reporting that we are seeing wild regional disparities. The Great Lakes region, so states like Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, they're getting absolutely hammered with sharp, rapid price spikes.
Yes, they are.
Meanwhile, right next door in Wisconsin, they're only seeing very modest gains. Why does crossing an invisible state line completely change the impact of a war happening on the other side of the planet?
It comes down to the localized architecture of that 11% distribution and 20% refining we just broke down.
Okay.
The Great Lakes region is uniquely vulnerable due to its pipeline infrastructure. They rely heavily on a specific network of Midwestern refineries and pipelines routing up from the Gulf. They just do not have the elasticity to easily pull finished gasoline from coastal ports if their normal supply chain is disrupted.
So let me make sure I've got this. If a local Chicago area refinery goes offline for routine spring maintenance, which happens every year, and that coincides perfectly with a sudden global supply shock from the Middle East, that specific region is basically trapped.
Exactly. They experience a localized compounding effect. Wisconsin, on the other hand, might be drawing from different terminals or benefiting from a different state tax structure that temporarily buffers the wholesale shock.
That makes sense.
The geography of energy is wildly uneven, and exogenous shocks like a war, they just expose the brittle links in the chain.
And we have to add the calendar to that list of brittle links, right?
Yeah.
Because we are heading straight into summer. Seasonal demand is about to act as an accelerant on these already volatile prices.
Oh, without a doubt.
Millions of people are prepping for summer road trips, which fundamentally shifts the demand curve upwards at the exact moment global supply is violently constrained.
The timing is catastrophic, frankly. And this brings us to the macroeconomic projections for the near future, which look incredibly challenging.
Yeah, I was looking at a May 4th report from Goldman Sachs, paired with a very blunt warning from John Quigley. He is a senior fellow at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania.
Right. Quigley's analysis is very telling.
Quigley paints a grim picture regarding our global oil inventories. He said, and I quote, "As the oil tanks go dry, as we use up the last of the inventory, that's when the real crunch is going to start to hit. Prices have to go much higher."
He is highlighting a crucial buffer mechanism that most consumers just never see. When a shock like the Strait of Hormuz closure happens, the world doesn't instantly run out of gas.
Right, because we have backups.
Exactly. We rely on global oil inventories, these massive commercial storage tanks and strategic petroleum reserves maintained by governments. We have been burning through those reserves for over 2 months to artificially suppress the price and keep the global economy functioning.
But you can only drain the tank for so long. And Quigley is saying we are nearing the lowest point in those global inventories since 2018.
The buffer is almost gone. When those tanks hit their operational minimums, the market is forced to rely entirely on whatever daily production is actually making it through the bottlenecks.
Right.
And that is when the theoretical price shock becomes an unavoidable physical reality.
And even if we see a best-case scenario, say the Persian Gulf normalizes by mid-May, Goldman Sachs is projecting that Brent crude will trade at a baseline of about $80 a barrel by year-end.
Right.
And while that is a relief from the $102 spike we saw earlier, the reporting explicitly notes that $80 is still roughly $10 higher than the baseline price prior to the war. The floor has permanently been raised.
A new, much more expensive normal is being established, and the secondary ripples of that new normal are just tearing through local communities.
So what does this all mean? We have to look at the ground-level reality of this, beyond the spreadsheets and the barrel projections. The secondary headlines from the CBS report paint a stark picture of the social and economic stress this is causing.
It is getting very real for people.
In Inglewood, Colorado, police are dealing with a surge of thieves, literally drilling holes into the plastic gas tanks of parked cars to steal fuel.
It is such a visceral indicator of economic desperation. A macro geopolitical event thousands of miles away instantly translates into localized street crime in suburban Colorado.
Yeah, and the squeeze is showing up in places you might not immediately connect to the gas pump. In Maryland, local food banks are reporting a surge in families needing assistance.
Which is directly tied to this.
Exactly. The root cause is the skyrocketing cost of diesel fuel. If it costs twice as much to fuel the massive refrigerated trucks transporting produce and dairy across the country, the grocery stores have to raise the price of milk and bread to cover that transportation overhead.
They pass the cost right onto the consumer.
Families are being pushed to the brink, not just by the cost of their daily commute, but by the hidden fuel surcharge baked into every single item at the supermarket.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you trace that line from a blocked strait in the Middle East to a damaged refinery to a drilled gas tank in Colorado to the cost of groceries in Maryland, you begin to understand the immense political pressure cooking underneath the surface.
Oh, yeah.
The administration in Washington is caught in an incredibly volatile situation.
Right. The Trump administration is actively struggling to assure Americans that relief is coming. But the reporting highlights the impossible bind they are in. When people are hurting economically, they look to the Oval Office for an immediate solution.
And the mechanism of political accountability is fascinating here because the domestic expectations completely mismatch the geopolitical reality.
How do you mean?
Well, the administration is tasked with managing acute domestic panic. You have voters staring at a $4.53 sign at the corner gas station, but the actual levers of control are located oceans away.
Right. It is not like they can just flip a switch.
Exactly. A president does not have a magic dial on their desk to lower the price of crude. They cannot sign an executive order to instantly repair a highly complex thermodynamic refining facility in the Middle East. And they certainly cannot order the Strait of Hormuz to just widen.
They can authorize a release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but as we discussed earlier, those global inventories are already training to 2018 levels. It is basically a temporary Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Exactly. The vulnerability of any political administration during an exogenous energy shock is profound. They are completely tethered to a fragile, hyper-globalized supply chain that they cannot directly control.
Yet they face all the blame.
Right. They face the immediate wrath of a populace that is experiencing crushing economic pain at the local level. It is the ultimate test of leadership, trying to navigate domestic economic survival when the variables are dictated by foreign conflicts.
So when we step back and look at the entirety of this crisis, that $1.56 surge you were seeing at the pump since February is the result of a terrifyingly perfect storm.
It really is.
It is a story of the futures market disconnecting from the spot market. It is the reality of a geographic choke point trapping 20% of the world's energy supply. It is the industrial nightmare of physically damaged refineries that will take unknown amounts of time and engineering to rebuild.
And do not forget the draining of those global oil inventories.
Right, the inventory is draining to their lowest levels in years, colliding head-on with the impending surge of summer road trip demand. It is a tangled web creating massive headaches for everyday drivers just trying to get to work and for political leaders trying to manage an economic fallout they cannot easily contain.
Taking all of that into account, it really leaves us with a profound structural question about the future of global infrastructure.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if a localized geopolitical conflict in one specific region can instantaneously drive up the cost of groceries in Maryland and trigger gas tank drilling in Colorado, how sustainable is this model?
That is a great point.
This crisis forces us to ask how this permanent state of vulnerability might fundamentally alter the way nations design their future energy grids.
Wow.
Will an economic shock of this magnitude serve as the ultimate catalyst? Will it force countries to finally and completely decouple their essential everyday infrastructure from these highly fragile globalized supply chains?
It certainly makes you wonder if our current system, relying on the stability of the entire globe just to drive to the grocery store, is fundamentally unsustainable. The next time you're standing at the pump, watching those digital numbers spin higher and higher, remember that you aren't just buying fuel.
Yeah.
You are paying the toll for a deeply interconnected and deeply fragile global system. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the numbers you see, and we will catch you next time.